The evening sun had barely dipped beneath the rolling hills of Wiltshire when Lady Eveline Ashford stood at the edge of the great drawing-room, her hands lightly clasped before her, a picture of measured composure despite the tumult within. The chandeliers above glimmered like frozen stars, their crystals scattering shards of light across the polished floor, yet none of their brilliance could mask the storm of whispered anticipation that swirled among the assembled guests. Lady Clara, her elder sister, resplendent in silk of the richest sapphire, moved through the crowd with effortless grace, drawing nods and exclamations from all who beheld her. Eveline's heart throbbed, not with envy, but with a wary understanding of the precarious balance that society demanded. She had long been aware that beauty commanded notice, yet it was steadiness of character, intellect, and courage that spoke to a deeper kind of worth, though the world often overlooked such virtues. It was in that very moment, as the music swelled from the distant gallery and servants glided between clusters of well-dressed ladies and gentlemen, that the news fell like a cruel draught through the ornate chamber. Lord Harrington, whose wealth and lineage had been thought to secure the Ashford family's ambitions, had withdrawn his proposal. The announcement, subtle yet deliberate, was carried by his voice across the room, polite but devoid of warmth. "I fear, Lady Eveline," he said with the stiff courtesy of a man who believed propriety could mask disdain, "that circumstances compel me to reconsider our engagement." A hush followed, sharp as a blade, and for a single, suspended heartbeat, the world seemed to tilt beneath Eveline's feet. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the assembled crowd, like leaves stirred by a sudden wind. The beauty of her sister, so long a shield and source of distraction for the world's gaze, could not guard her from this humiliation. Eveline's cheeks burned, a delicate rose blooming against the pale perfection of her skin, and yet she kept her chin lifted, her eyes averted from the polite stares that threatened to pierce her composure. She had been schooled in restraint, in the careful art of maintaining dignity even as the heart faltered, and she would not betray her inner desolation. The drawing-room, with its gilded mirrors and carved oak mantels, seemed suddenly too small, too suffocating, and she felt the pulse of her own anger and grief intertwining. She moved toward the French doors that opened onto the gardens, her silk skirts whispering against the marble as if the very fabric conspired to carry her away from the stares that pricked at her soul. Without a word, she slipped beyond the threshold, leaving the murmurs behind, her departure an unspoken protest against the expectations that had long held her in quiet captivity. Outside, the evening air was crisp and fragrant with the scent of damp earth and flowering roses, the garden stretching before her like a secret world that promised anonymity and solace. She walked quickly, her boots pressing into the dew-laden grass, and yet each step was measured, a testament to the self-discipline instilled by years of navigating the delicate hierarchies of aristocratic life. Minutes passed in a silence broken only by the distant murmur of servants and the rustle of leaves, when the sound of approaching hooves caught her attention. A carriage, black as polished obsidian and trimmed with brass fittings, emerged from the gravel drive, its presence commanding yet unintrusive. She hesitated, curiosity warring with caution, as the door opened to reveal a figure she had not anticipated. Duke Sebastian Hawthorne, a man of 28 years whose reputation for discretion and quiet authority preceded him, stepped forward, his dark eyes meeting hers with an intensity that both unsettled and intrigued. His attire was impeccable, a deep green coat cut to emphasize broad shoulders, paired with riding boots polished to a reflective sheen. There was no flourish of arrogance in his demeanor, only the measured grace of a man accustomed to command, and yet a gentleness lingered in the set of his jaw and the tilt of his head. "Lady Eveline," he said, his voice low, yet carrying a timbre that seemed to resonate with the very air around them. "Your presence in the gardens alone has drawn my attention. Might I offer assistance in your circumstance?" Eveline's first instinct was to decline, to retreat into the privacy of her own thoughts and the familiar walls of the estate. Yet something in the steadiness of his gaze, the quiet patience in his tone, disarmed the protective barriers she had erected around her wounded pride. "Your concern is most gracious, Your Grace," she replied, bowing her head with a restraint that masked the tremor of surprise. "But I am capable of managing my own affairs." Sebastian inclined his head, a shadow of understanding passing across his features. "Of course, I had presumed only to offer a reprieve from the scrutiny within the drawing room. The world can be intolerant of moments of vulnerability." His eyes, dark and unyielding, lingered on hers, as though searching for the truth beneath the surface. There is merit in a companion who bears herself with composure, yet even the strongest requires sanctuary. Eveline found herself caught between the impulse to flee and the strange allure of his offer. In that fleeting moment, she recognized a depth in the Duke's perception, an ability to discern character where others saw only decorum or superficial charm. Here was a man who understood, without need of explanation, the delicate balance between social expectation and personal integrity. A subtle curiosity, previously dormant, began to stir, intertwining with the embarrassment that still clung to her like a second skin. "Very well," she said at last, her voice steady though her heart fluttered with an unfamiliar combination of trepidation and anticipation. "If you insist, Your Grace, I shall accept your courtesy for this evening." Sebastian's lips curved in the barest hint of a smile, a gesture so slight it might have gone unnoticed, yet it held a promise of discretion and understanding. "Then it is settled," he said, extending his hand in a manner that was neither commanding nor presumptuous. Eveline placed her gloved hand within his, and for a brief instant, the weight of societal expectation, of whispered gossip and familial disappointment, seemed to lift, replaced by a fragile sense of trust and the first glimmerings of hope. The carriage rolled away from the estate, its wheels crunching over gravel as the gardens receded into shadows. Inside, Eveline remained silent, though her mind was alight with the questions and possibilities this encounter had unearthed. The world of salons, balls, and whispered scandal had not disappeared, but for the first time in many hours, she felt the stirrings of agency, of choice, within her own hands. The Duke, seated opposite her, did not speak, and yet his quiet presence offered a kind of reassurance that words could not capture. As the twilight deepened and the landscape of Wiltshire unfurled in muted greens and golds, Eveline's thoughts wandered not to her humiliation, but to the unexpected trajectory of her evening. A broken engagement, a sudden carriage, and a man whose discernment surpassed mere appearances. These elements combined into a tableau both unnerving and exhilarating. It was a beginning, though she did not yet understand its shape. And as the carriage wheels turned steadily toward the estate that would serve as her temporary refuge, Eveline allowed herself the merest flicker of anticipation, a cautious acknowledgement that perhaps, amid the rigid confines of society, a more profound and authentic connection might yet be found. The carriage rolled along the winding lanes of Wiltshire, flanked by hedgerows that trembled with the whisper of the evening wind. Eveline sat quietly, her hands folded upon her lap, each finger tracing the delicate seams of her gloves, as though the motion could steady the disarray of her thoughts. The air smelled of damp earth and fallen leaves, a fragrance at once melancholy and cleansing, as if the countryside itself sought to wash away the sting of society's disapproval. Beside her, Duke Sebastian Hawthorne remained composed, his posture impeccable, yet Eveline sensed in the occasional glance, the careful shift of his gaze toward her, that his mind was engaged, not with the world outside the carriage, but with the fragile figure who had just left the drawing room in silent defiance. Upon reaching the estate, a house of stately proportions yet intimate warmth, Eveline was guided into the library, where walls of polished oak and shelves of leather-bound volumes exuded an atmosphere of quiet contemplation. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting a golden glow over the room and igniting a subtle dance of shadows across the patterned carpet. Eveline, accustomed to the grandeur of her own family home, could not suppress a soft exhalation of surprise. The Duke's world, while noble and dignified, seemed infused with a kind of lived authenticity, a space that belonged not only to appearances but to thought, reflection, and quiet dignity. She felt, in the stillness, a measure of relief from the scrutinizing eyes and murmurs of the Ashford drawing room. Sebastian, noting her moment of reflection, spoke without preamble, his voice low but unwavering. "I hope the arrangements of your evening do not feel confining, Lady Eveline. The world can be harsh in its expectations, yet here you are permitted a respite." His gaze met hers with an intensity that neither demanded nor presumed, but suggested a careful curiosity, the sort that studies without judgment and admires without ostentation. Eveline, in turn, felt her initial defenses falter under the quiet gravity of his regard. "I am grateful, Your Grace," she replied, her voice tempered with caution, "though I confess my relief is mixed with the memory of recent events. A certain abruptness of change has left me less composed than I might wish." Her words, measured and polite, betrayed the delicate tremor of her heart. Sebastian inclined his head, a shadow of understanding softening the sharpness of his features. Abruptness often reveals character more plainly than the steady tide of routine ever could. In my observation, you have borne your evening with restraint that many would envy. The Duke's praise, though understated, pricked at Eveline's heart with an unfamiliar warmth. Here, a man of reputation and influence had seen not only her outward composure, but the quiet strength beneath it, acknowledging what others had deemed invisible. A fragile curiosity began to bloom within her, a mingling of intrigue, admiration, and the tentative stirrings of trust. Over the following days, Eveline's temporary residence within the Duke's estate revealed layers of both character and circumstance. Morning walks through the rose-laden gardens offered glimpses of Sebastian's methodical attention to the estate and its inhabitants. He conversed with gardeners and stable hands alike, listening with patience and engaging with a courtesy that spoke of genuine interest rather than perfunctory duty. Eveline observed in him a balance rare in men of his station, authority tempered by discretion, strength softened by empathy, and a mind that valued reason as much as lineage. She found herself moved by the small gestures, the careful ordering of books, the selection of teas, the attention to light and shadow in the rooms where she read and wrote letters that never left her desk. Letters became a subtle conduit for exchange, each word imbued with careful thought, a veiled intimacy that drew Eveline into a rhythm of understanding. Sebastian's notes were measured, yet tinged with observation and quiet amusement. "I trust the last chapter of your book has not left you in despair, Lady Eveline. Courage, after all, is often born in quiet moments and not solely in the glare of public notice." Eveline's replies, crafted with precision yet heartfelt honesty, carried the echo of a mind seeking companionship of equal depth. "Indeed, Your Grace, one finds in solitude the clarity that society's noise so often obscures. Perhaps it is in these quieter hours that true measure is taken." The estate, seemingly serene, was not immune to the world beyond its walls. Whispers of scandal reached Eveline's ears through letters and visiting acquaintances, society's astonishment that the Duke had chosen her, the younger daughter, over the accomplished and celebrated Lady Clara. The murmurs, though distant, pricked at her consciousness, blending uneasily with her own insecurities. Yet Sebastian's presence offered a counterbalance. His subtle demonstrations of trust and respect reinforced the growing conviction that her worth extended beyond the superficial appraisal of society. One afternoon, as mist rolled across the gardens and droplets of rain kissed the petals of the rose bushes, Sebastian invited Eveline for a carriage ride. The weather, unrelenting yet unthreatening, wrapped the world in muted grays and greens, transforming the familiar paths into a tableau of intimacy and quiet reflection. The carriage rattled along the gravel, and for a moment, silence enveloped them, each attuned to the rhythm of horse hooves and the distant murmur of nature. Eveline, seated opposite the Duke, found herself unburdened in ways unexpected. The world's demands fell away, leaving only the nuanced conversation, the gentle glances, and the delicate tension of proximity. A sudden downpour forced them to halt beneath an ancient oak, its broad branches sheltering the carriage from the heavier rain. They stepped from the vehicle, close yet conscious of propriety, and the moisture-laden air clung to their attire, mingling discomfort with a certain intimacy. Their hands brushed as they adjusted cloaks and skirts, a touch fleeting yet electrifying, the smallest gesture charged with significance. Eveline felt her pulse quicken, aware of the silent acknowledgement of mutual understanding, an unspoken recognition that the superficiality of courtship had given way to something rarer and deeper. Sebastian's gaze lingered for a heartbeat too long, yet neither spoke of the sensation that hovered between them. Instead, he remarked on the strength of the oak, its endurance a quiet metaphor that did not go unnoticed. Even the oldest and most steadfast must bend to the winds, he said softly. Yet in bending, there is a resilience that is often overlooked. Eveline, feeling the weight of his metaphor, met his eyes with a tentative acknowledgement. Resilience, your grace, is often the measure of those whom society regards as inconspicuous. Perhaps it is in the quiet, unseen moments that true fortitude reveals itself. The carriage ride resumed, the rain easing into a gentle mist, and Eveline sat back, reflecting on the days spent within the Duke's presence. The estate had become both sanctuary and stage, a place where the intricate dance of social expectation, personal integrity, and burgeoning affection intertwined. Tokens of thoughtfulness, a book gifted with a handwritten note, the careful attention to her comfort, the subtle encouragement to speak and be heard, formed a language of connection that required neither words nor public display. In these exchanges, Eveline sensed the shaping of a bond both fragile and profound, one that promised a future guided by mutual respect rather than fleeting admiration. As the sun set beyond the estate's horizon, casting long shadows across the gardens and painting the sky with muted shades of gold and rose, Eveline allowed herself a rare moment of contemplative hope. The world outside might still chatter, judging and whispering, yet within the confines of these walls and under the watchful, discerning eyes of the Duke, she felt a quiet certainty taking root. The path ahead remained uncertain, fraught with societal expectation and personal discovery, but for the first time since the humiliation of the broken engagement, Eveline sensed the stirring of possibility, an invitation to a connection measured not in appearances, but in depth, courage, and unspoken understanding. Winter had settled upon the Wiltshire countryside, draping the estate in a quilt of snow, so pristine it seemed untouched by the concerns of society. Frost clung delicately to the branches of oak and elm, and the gardens, once fragrant with roses, now lay quiet beneath a brittle white layer, each step leaving a transient imprint, as if to remind all who walked there that beauty, like time, was fleeting. Within the house, the hearth glowed with a steady warmth, its flames dancing across the polished wood, casting gentle illumination upon the library where Eveline Ashford sat, a small notebook resting in her lap. She wrote with deliberate care, each letter of her correspondence to Duke Sebastian imbued with thought, reflection, and the cautious courage of a woman discovering both her voice and her heart. Sebastian entered quietly, pausing in the doorway as if uncertain whether to disturb her solitude. His presence, though familiar, carried the weight of expectation and unspoken desire, an ever-present reminder that their connection had deepened beyond the safe courtesies of civility. Eveline looked up, meeting his gaze, and in that instant, the space between them seemed charged with a tension both exhilarating and terrifying. The snow outside muffled all sound, leaving only the cadence of their breaths and the subtle crackle of the fire to punctuate the unspoken conversation that passed between them. "You have written again," Sebastian observed, his voice low yet rich with warmth. "And in each line, I perceive not merely propriety, but thought, intelligence, and a courage that refuses to bend wholly beneath the weight of circumstance." Eveline's lips curved in the faintest of smiles, a gesture delicate yet triumphant, For in his recognition, she found the validation that society had denied and the promise of understanding that her own family had often overlooked. "I have tried," she replied, her voice soft, measured, to convey what is too often unseen or dismissed by those who judge by appearances alone. "It is a precarious task, yet necessary, if one is to be understood." She paused, gathering her composure, aware that the vulnerability she allowed herself in this moment was unprecedented. "And I write, not only to clarify thought, but to affirm the quiet certainties that sustain me." Sebastian stepped closer, the faint scent of winter air clinging to his coat, mingling with the warmth of the library. He extended his hand toward her, not in command, but as an invitation, a gesture that spoke of trust and equality. Eveline placed her gloved hand in his, the contact fleeting yet potent, as if each touch carried with it the weight of months of observation, shared glances, and subtle understanding. Their eyes met, and in that meeting, a tacit acknowledgment of affection and mutual respect passed silently between them, unadorned by words yet full of promise. The peace of the estate, however, could not entirely shield them from the scrutiny of the world beyond. A carriage approached in the late afternoon, bringing with it Lady Clara and the Ashford patriarch, whose expressions bore the formal rigidity of concern edged with disapproval. They entered the library with measured steps, the click of boots on polished wood announcing their intrusion. Clara's eyes, wide and flashing with indignation, sought Eveline's, while their father's countenance reflected the tension between duty, pride, and unease. "You must understand," Clara began, her voice tight with effort to remain composed, "that society will not easily forgive such irregularity. The Duke, esteemed as he is, has chosen you over one of his own station and accomplishment, and the implications for our family's reputation are considerable." Eveline's heart beat swiftly, yet she met her sister's gaze without retreat. In this confrontation, she recognized the final test of her resolve, to assert herself with dignity, to defend not only her choices but the integrity of her character. Sebastian, standing beside her with a quiet steadiness, addressed the Ashfords in tones that balanced firmness with courtesy. "I have considered my choice with care," he said, his gaze unwavering, "and it is my conviction that Lady Eveline's character, intellect, and moral fortitude render her the companion most suited to the responsibilities of my household and title. Appearances, while valued by society, cannot measure the depth of partnership that sustains a family and secures its legacy." His words carried the authority of rank, yet were tempered with a tenderness that bespoke genuine affection. The exchange, though fraught with tension, revealed new facets of all present. Eveline felt a surge of pride mingled with humility, for the man she admired defended her not from whim, but from recognition of her intrinsic worth. Clara's indignation softened imperceptibly, tempered by a grudging acknowledgment of the Duke's discernment, while their father, long concerned with propriety and alliances, perceived that true advantage lay not merely in appearance or social polish, but in character that could weather the vicissitudes of life and society alike. As the visitors departed, leaving the estate once more shrouded in winter's quiet embrace, Eveline and Sebastian found themselves alone by the window, with a frost etched delicate patterns upon the glass. He reached for her hand again, this time holding it with deliberate intimacy, and Eveline allowed the warmth of his presence to seep into her very being. "The world may chatter," he said softly, "but here, in the sanctuary we have created, truth and sincerity prevail. You have taught me, Lady Eveline, that courage is often quiet, and love is measured not in spectacle, but in steadfast regard." Eveline's gaze lingered on his, a mixture of reverence, longing, and a serene joy that comes from recognition by one who perceives the soul beyond the exterior. "And you have shown me," she replied, her voice steady yet infused with emotion, "that the bond of hearts need not conform to society's fleeting judgments. It is in constancy, understanding, and shared thought that partnership is forged." The evening deepened, shadows lengthening and firelight flickering, as they walked together to the garden, where snow crunched softly beneath their feet. Each step, though cautious and measured, carried the weight of burgeoning intimacy. They paused beneath the arch of frost-laden branches, where moonlight glimmered like polished silver across the snow. Sebastian lifted a gloved hand to brush a stray lock of hair from Eveline's face, a gesture at once tender and deliberate, marking the culmination of weeks of subtle courtship, mutual respect, and emotional revelation. In that stillness, words were unnecessary. Their eyes met, conveying promises that could not yet be spoken aloud, yet needed no articulation. Here was a union not of convenience, nor of societal expectation, but of hearts aligned, of minds and souls recognizing a rare and profound kinship. The snow fell gently around them, each flake a witness to the quiet triumph of understanding over circumstance, courage over fear, and love over rigid convention. As they returned indoors, the estate enveloped in the warmth of firelight and the hush of evening, Eveline allowed herself the rarest indulgence. Hope, fully realized yet tempered with awareness of the world beyond the walls. The Duke, her companion and protector, moved beside her with a grace that was at once reassuring and exhilarating, and she understood, with clarity born of experience and reflection, that their story, though constrained by society's strictures, would unfold with deliberate patience, steadfast loyalty, and a depth of affection that neither scandal nor expectation could diminish. By nightfall, the library was once more quiet, the fire reduced to embers that cast a gentle glow upon the snow outside. Eveline sat, pen in hand, capturing the day's events in the careful intimacy of letters that would remain private, yet serve as a testament to the evolution of her heart. Sebastian stood nearby, a watchful sentinel of warmth and constancy. In the stillness, the resonance of their mutual understanding filled the room, a promise that the trials of the past, the judgment of the world, and the uncertainties of the future would not deter them from the path they had chosen, a path forged in recognition, respect, and love that was both restrained and profound. The winter night deepened, and in that quiet, contemplative hour, Eveline felt the assurance that true partnership, born of intellect, courage, and unwavering regard, was at hand. The world beyond might chatter, might judge, and might seek to impose its will. Yet within the sanctuary of the estate, two hearts had discovered in one another the enduring power of connection that transcends appearance, expectation, and time itself. And as the firelight flickered upon their features, the promise of a shared life, slow, deliberate, and profoundly intimate, lay before them, a delicate yet unshakable foundation upon which their future would be built.